What you're about to see is an interview with someone called John Lavido. Now, you probably haven't heard of John Lavido. He's not a big artist. He's not touring the world. And you're probably wondering, why, Sam, are you interviewing this guy? Well, John's a very interesting person. I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But John reached out to me just over a year ago now, asking if I did coaching. He wanted to find a coach, a mentor, to help him learn music production. And at the time, I wasn't doing any formal coaching. I wasn't advertising my services. I'm still not. But I thought I'd give it a go. And so we started talking for 1 hour every 2 weeks over Skype. And over the past year since doing that, John has made immense progress. And it's not just because of me. It's actually because of John and how he approaches his learning. And that's why I wanted to interview him, because he's very systematic and deliberate about learning music production. He comes up with systems. He works in a very particular way. We're going to talk about that. So that's why I wanted to interview John. Some of the things we talk about in this interview are how to combat overwhelm. So maybe you're a new producer. Maybe you're looking at these guys who've been producing for 10 years and you're thinking, if that's how long it takes to make good music, then I don't know if I want to be a part of this. Well, we talk about that and the fact that it doesn't actually need to take 10 years to become good, and also how to deal with that overwhelming feeling of it's going to take so many hours to become proficient, to become good at this. And I asked John that question, how he dealt with that early on. We also talk about what's called deliberate practice or purposeful practice, and this is something that a lot of producers ignore or don't know about. And it's unfortunate because deliberate practice is the best way to learn. So a lot of people will say, just make songs, just make song after song and you'll get good. Well, yeah, you will. But is there a more effective way to get better at music production? Turns out there is. So John and I also talk about that. We talk about some of John's systems for learning. So he's got this great system for learning how to write melodies that he came up with. And it's amazing. I'm using it myself, actually. And I recommend you do too. And also apply that kind of structure that we talk about for a system to create your own systems for learning particular things, very specific production skills. And if you're wondering why they need to be specific, why you need to have specific systems for specific skills, then watch the interview, because we talk about that. Now, if you watch interviews with producers, with DJs on YouTube, one thing that often comes up is the importance of hard work. And hard work is important, but what these people will say, what these artists will say when asked about what makes him successful, they'll say, you got to spend 12 hours a day in the studio. People like Kanye West, people like Armin van Buuren even, they all say this, you got to spend all day in the studio, hustle, 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 7 days a week. But that's not actually true. In fact, scientifically, it's not true at all. And so John and I talk about that because John's work routine involves probably about 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours a day. And that's it. So he doesn't spend 12 hours a day in the studio. And he's made more progress. He's made progress more quickly than people that I know who spend 12 hours a day in the studio. So it's not necessarily about how many hours you put in. It's about what you do in those hours. Again, coming back to deliberate practice. And also, if you're practicing or learning hard enough, you shouldn't be able to put in 12 hours. You should be too tired to do that. So that's an interesting point as well. Anyway, we talk about that. We talk about a bunch more. If you want to check out John's work, go to johnlavido.com. You can follow him there. You can follow him along on his journey. He's very ambitious. He puts out a bunch of good articles too. So make sure to check them out. And he's an approachable guy. If you tweet him, he'll probably respond. So without further ado, here is John. I hope you enjoy the interview. Peace out.
So, John, I wanted to do this. I've never done a case study before, but you reached out to me. I think it was Christmas Day last year, 2015, because I had to go back and find the email, and it was on the 25th. And you were asking about coaching, which I wasn't doing at the time. But whatever, decided to do it. And over the past 12 months, it's been, I've seen you make immense progress, more than anyone else I've seen in the production world. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what you did, because it certainly wasn't just me that caused that to happen. But to begin with, go back like a year, you're running a few businesses, you're location independent, great life. What makes you decide to get into music?
I think it was. I mean, there's less sort of a long story and a short story, but the short version of it is that I built a business. I was able to travel and live anywhere. I spent most of my time in Thailand, originally from Sydney, Australia, but spent most of my time in Thailand. And eventually, when you do that, I've seen a lot of people in my position do it. You kind of go like, what do I do now? I've got money. I've got all this freedom. What's next? And then you start thinking about, what do I really want to do? And to be honest, I bounced around a lot, and we can go into that if you want, but bounced around a lot, and eventually, through a long process, I guess, of self-discovery, eventually realized that what I really wanted to do, that if I'm, hit all these financial goals, what I really wanted to do was make music. So I'm like, fuck it, let's just go and do the music right now.
So you bounced around a bit. How did you work out that those things weren't worth pursuing?
Oh, I think I struggled for a long time. I think everyone, usually in their 20s, goes through that period of like, what the hell am I doing? What's life about? I think it's really natural, especially today when there's so many different options for people to, different things that people can do. And it wasn't until I met a life coach who I was always so skeptical of, because I thought they were basically full of shit. And I helped her out with some stuff because she was looking to interview some business people. And in return, she gave me a free coaching session. She didn't really tell me to do anything. She just asked me lots of questions. And one of those questions was, what's your dream life? And I remember saying that at this point, music wasn't even on my mind. I grew up playing music, but I basically ignored it for 5 years to focus on business. And initially I was going to say my dream life is, it's a certain amount of money. It's certain, in the gym, girls, whatever, something more typical. And then I don't know what made me do it, but something made me go, well, I want to feel like Mark Cuban. And Mark Cuban's this famous, sort of a bit snarky business guy, billionaire. And he said, if I died tomorrow and could come back as anyone in the entire world, alive or dead, I'd come back as me. And I was like, I want to feel like that about my life. And then I also said the addition to that was like, I was watching Kanye West videos at the time, just sort of these Kanye West motivational videos. And it's so clear, I think anyone who's seen him, is how passionate he is about what he does. Whether you like him or not, he's just really, really passionate. I was like, I want to feel like Mark Cuban in the sense that I love my life, and I want the passion that Kanye West has for something. It doesn't have to be rap. I'm not really I don't listen a lot to Kanye West anyway, but I want that passion for something. And then so how that ended up sort of taking me towards music is I think she then said, each morning when you meditate, just try and bring up this feeling of what it feels like. So get in touch with the basic emotion of what that would be, and just do that every day. And so I did that, and I mean, I don't know how it works, and there was other things I was doing, but I think that somehow primed my brain so that over time I'd gradually notice things that made me feel that way. I'd be at a party and I'd be dancing. I'm like, this is amazing. I'm so joyful right now. Or I remember doing like, not really DJing, but someone had virtual DJ open on their laptop at a small get together at his apartment, like 10 people in the room. No one was really listening to music. They were all just talking. But I got on and did a few tracks poorly, but still did it. And I got a big buzz out of it. And whereas usually I'd be like, well, that was fine. And then I'd go back to daily, I'd be like, that was cool. But then back to business the next day, back to the normal life. I think probably in part because of that, trying to tap into that feeling every day, my mind goes, well, whoa, like this is the feeling. Like what would it be like to have more of this feeling every day? Like does it have to be just on a random Saturday night at this random party? Or like would there be a way that if I consciously aimed for that or tried to create that, would it happen? And so there was a few experiences like that. And then in December, it was December the other day, it's December 8th today. I think on December 5 or 6, I got back from a friend's sort of week-long party in Thailand and had a great experience dancing and just dancing all week. Didn't even drink, danced all week at this party. And came back, I was like, that's it. I'm going to take the next step, whatever that is, and downloaded Logic, bought Logic, downloaded Logic, and started literally a year ago.
That's amazing. Did you ever, because I've thought about this with things other than music. Like I remember a few years ago, I had a friend he's a great developer, and I was like, oh, I should learn to code, but there's that part of me that's like, Sam, do you know how many hours it takes to become proficient at that? Did that ever cross your mind, knowing that, you've run some businesses, it takes a long time to learn skills? Did you think about that? Because I think that stops a lot of people from getting into music or anything for that matter. Just the overwhelming feeling that it's going to take so long to get decent.
Well, I mean, at first, like when I first did it in December, I wasn't really committing to it. Like someone had lunch with someone, I think in the month before then, in November or something like that, and they'd said something, because we're talking about this idea. I was definitely searching and trying to figure out, like, how do you figure out what you want to do, and I keep meeting people who are going through this, and he said something that really stuck with me, which was that you don't really need to know exactly where you're going. You just need to follow the clues. You just need to know sort of what the next step or the next few steps are. And so, like, when I was in Colombia, that was when I met the life coach and started doing that sort of that visualization, I guess you'd call it. And then, I was sort of went traveling and been around a few places. And by the time I got to, Thailand and had been to the party and then came back, to me it was just, I sort of did that small amount of DJing at this get-together. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting clue. And then went to this party and had so much fun dancing. I was like, oh, that's another big clue. All right, well, let's download Logic and let's just see what happens. Let's just make a bit of music. That was sort of my attitude for a while. And it wasn't until April this year, so a good 5 months later, when I really decided that I was going to go basically switch and make business my side thing and music my full-time thing.
Mm-hmm.
So up until that point, it was just I was just exploring. And my intention for this year was to just explore music, feel it out, see if it's something I wanted to do more of. But by April, I was like, yeah, I'm going all in on this.
Now, I want to switch gears for a bit and talk about some more, not technical, but interesting things. So you and I we're both interested in this concept called deliberate practice. Can you explain what that is to people who haven't heard of it before?
Right, so I think the best way is just by way of example, and because this comes from Anders Ericsson. I've got to put together this interview actually with him that'll be up in a bit. But Anders came up with this idea that deliberate practice is very different from what most people do when they practice. And the best way to think about it is, he studied violinists, so you could apply this to music production pretty easily. But imagine someone studying a violin piece, classical music, and they're struggling with a certain piece. And so what normal people practicing will do, or average players, they'll get out the piece and they'll just play the whole thing. And they'll play it a few times until they feel a bit tired, or until they feel like they've just done a good job. And then they'll call it done, and then they'll go do something else. Like they're not really tracking any metrics. They're not really targeting anything in particular, other than the whole piece. And so then Anders Ericsson, the scientist who did this research, the next thing you might call purposeful practice, which is where you basically, it's sort of the halfway in between normal practice and deliberate practice, where you just sort of just a little bit more purposeful about it. You might just practice with a bit more intensity, or just try and focus a bit harder. And that's good, but it's still not great. It's still not what the experts do. What he found that the experts did is that they would painstakingly tease out their weaknesses at something, and then create specific exercises to target those things. So, and the way to tease out those weaknesses in the first place is, a big part of that is getting coaches, getting mentors and teachers, however you can do it, or getting, in the case of music, you can get feedback from your friends. But then when you've done that, to target it really specifically. So a violinist, if they're screwing up the first line and the intro of this piece, they wouldn't practice the whole song. They wouldn't even practice the whole intro. They'd figure out like the 1 or 2 bars when they're fucking it up, and they just play that. They'd slow it down maybe until they could play it, and they'd speed it up gradually on a metronome, 1 beat at a time, until they could get to that point where they could nail it not just once, but 10 times out of 10. To me, that's what deliberate practice is.
And how have you applied that then over the past 12 months to music production?
A lot of people say, I think you've mentioned this a few times too, is just make a lot of songs. And I think that's true. In some ways, if you make a lot of songs, you will get better, but that would be somewhat similar to the violinist who just plays lots of different music. They're going to get better. They do a lot of it, but they're not going to get better as fast as they might like. And so what I've been doing is, first I read, there's one book worth mentioning here, is The 4-Hour Chef, which by Tim Ferriss. He's good. You don't have to read the whole book. Just read the chapter on learning, because he mentions that you want to break down any skill or anything you're trying to learn into its basic components. So within music, it can seem like it's overwhelming, but you could probably break it down into a handful of key areas called, what I've done is I've broken it down into composition, sound design, mixing, and mastering, and maybe you could throw in DJing or just, performance skills or something as a 5th area. So once I did that, then I started to think, well, all right, well, where do I suck? Like, what's really limiting me right now? If I try and make a song and get it out there, like, what's really holding it back? Looking at it as an entire system, like if it was a car or a spaceship or something, if that was my skill, and I had to figure out what was the one thing that, if changed or if improved, would move the whole thing forward. So that's how I've been trying to that's the sort of philosophy I've been using. And then I've been using obviously feedback from you and feedback from friends and family and marketing it online to see like, where is this falling down? Like, is it the mixing? Is it that I can't make it? Like, does it sound too muddy? Is that my issue? Or is it that, man, my sounds are just so generic or they just sound like crap or whatever? Or is it that the composition is bad? And I think what I've come to, and this is probably something worth touching on at some point, is that you probably laugh when I mention this, but like all of this depends on what you want or what the person listening to this wants. Because I know what I want, which is to be in, like, when I think about like where I'd like to take this music thing, is to me it's primarily about enjoyment, but the secondary purpose of doing it is to play music for as many people as possible, which means, look, if I could go and headline at Ultra Music Festival, like that would, to me, that would be amazing. Or to go play on the radio, or to go like hang out with Calvin Harris and or do that kind of stuff. Like that to me is the pinnacle. For other people, it's going to be to try and make music that other producers like, to have that thing where it's sort of in the guitar world, you've got Joe Satriani and Steve Vai, like guitarists like those guys, because you don't really want to listen to it, but a guitarist can go, wow, he's so good. That's a different market. So for me, because I'm targeting, you just say a mainstream market, I think when you look at the songs, you can have a well-written song that's poorly produced, and it's still a well-written song. It's still catchy. You can play it on the guitar or the piano or with synthesizers, and it's still going to sound like a pretty good song, even if the mix kind of sucks. Whereas if you have a shitty song, like the composition is boring, the arrangement sucks, the lyrics don't resonate, just it's a bad composition, and for whatever reason, it could be perfectly produced, and it's still not going to hit. And so that's made me, especially the last few months, I've definitely been more focused on composition for that reason. And eventually, though, it'll get to a point where I'm like, well, the composition's like, that's not holding it back anymore. What I need now is to be able to make sounds like Skrillex and Noisier, for example, or whatever. It's finding those weaknesses and then attacking them.
What kind of system did you come up with to improve that composition? Because you didn't just, because I know this, you didn't just, I'm going to get better at composition, so I'll just write a bunch of melodies. It was a little bit more deliberate.
Right. So I think initially what I started doing was remaking songs. And so that was, I guess, this was 3 or 4 months ago now, 5 months ago. Initially when I started really applying this approach, I'd remake a song. And after I'd done that a handful of times, I was able to get the mix sounding pretty good. The sounds, like, it wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to be like, wow, I thought it was pretty cool. But then what I've started doing the last couple of months, and what's working really, really well is, and this goes back to the deliberate practice idea of like trying to get as granular as possible. So like someone might say, well, if you want to get better at writing melodies, we'll just go write a bunch of songs. What I've been doing instead is, I've got some of these ideas from your song analysis posts as well. But I started analyzing songs. So I created a spreadsheet and analyzed them similar to how you would do it and go through, sort of section by section and write out what came in, what came out, all that sort of stuff. And then that grew into this, I can't remember exactly what made me do this, but I started reading Hook Theory a month or two ago or something like that. And so that's, I think, sort of culminated in this way of practicing where I've been reading Hook Theory. So Hook Theory is a book on music theory. And then I've got Logic open next to me with, say, it could be any song. I was doing a Madeon song, Finale, one day. So I'd analyzed the whole song. I'd remade, I think, the main drop and sort of the verse, but not remade to try and make it sound good. Just remade it with like a default drum, like a basic drum kit, a piano, and a bass. Like I was specifically trying not to do any sound design or mixing. So there was no delay, reverbs, or anything like that. It was just some basic instruments to get a feel for what was going on in that section. And then with Hook Theory, I'd read a bit of Hook Theory, find the concept, and then I'd take the let's say the verse section from Finale, and I'd keep the chords. But then I'd copy and paste, like I'd just duplicate the track stack. So I'd keep all that, but I'd keep the chords, keep the bass, and I'd write a new melody that's almost the same. It's got the same, what you call melodic repetition, but the notes change. And then I'd do that again, but I'd change the repetition structure. So I'd make the rhythm of it vary. And then I'd do it again, and I'd rewrite the whole melody from scratch. I'd just delete it, start from scratch. And then I'd do it again, but I'd do it with a completely new chord progression. And so on like that. And what ends up happening is because that's practicing the melody, right? I'm not making a whole song. I'm not spending any time. There's no mixing, no sound design, no arranging. Just literally playing with the melody. Because the Hook Theory was amazing, by the way, because that totally worth reading. Because then I could go through a melody and be like, that doesn't sound right. And whereas before, that's all I'd know. I'd just be able to say, that doesn't sound right. With the music theory, and I think that's really probably the fundamental thing underlying some of this other stuff, is that then I could look, well, this note here, it's like, it's an unstable scale degree happening on a strong beat, which shouldn't happen. So I need to change that to a stable scale degree. And so that's like a very mathematical or scientific way of saying that's what needs to happen to this melody. I think maybe we're getting a bit too technical, but the idea is like getting really granular about what the weakness is, and then creating a really tight exercise or tight constraints to target that weakness.
Maybe a bit of a hard question, but do you have any tips for developing those kind of systems, or any resources that might help? Because I know
I totally read the book by Anders Ericsson, which is called Peak. I'd read 4 Hour Chef, or just the chapter on learning. But the main thing is to sit back and like, first you got to figure out what you want. Do you want to be like BT? Do you want to be mainstream? Do you want to do something else? Like, what's your end goal here? Other than just making stuff and having fun. And if that's all your goal and it doesn't really matter, then just do whatever. But I think that makes it a bit tricky. I just feel like how to develop the exercises. I think it's just about getting is really specific on what you want to practice. So if you say you want to practice mixing, that doesn't really say much. Like when I get back to practicing mixing, what I plan on doing is getting the software out there now that'll basically play different sounds at certain frequencies, and you have to guess which frequency it is. And so that would be a really it doesn't sound very fun, but it would be a really good way to train your brain to recognize specific frequencies, just because it's focusing on is recognizing specific frequencies. So I think the way to think about it is that, whatever you first got to figure out what the weakness is based on what, the problem that's separating you from where you want to go. And having a coach or mentor or teacher can really help with that. Once you've figured that out, you want to create get extremely specific as possible in terms of what the weakness actually is. You can't just say mixing or just composition. You want to be able to kind of say, well, is it that I don't understand music theory? All right, go read a music theory book. Is it? And then if you read a music theory book, don't just read it. Like, how can you take each concept and then write 10 melodies based on it so that you make sure that concept isn't just read and understood, but it's really deeply understood to the point where you can use it to produce something of value. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. It's just like getting that intuitive knowledge, which is really the only way that happens. Like, and I think, for instance, I've come across producers who can make amazing harmonically, melodically complex music without theory knowledge, but it's taken them 20 years, and trial and error. And I think that's an inefficient way to do things. And so going through a music theory book and actually, like, for instance, I wish I had done this, learning intervals, just like the names of them and so on. Like, I wish I had done an exercise for that, because that just speeds up things so much. If you understand intervals on an intuitive level, you understand chords on a more intuitive level, and so on and so forth. So I think that's so helpful. I want to change subject for a moment. You say, or last time we talked about this, you said you're making music about 3 to 4 hours a day. That is not, given that you have the capacity to spend more time on music, people might find that confusing, especially when there's a lot of successful producers saying, I spent 12 hours a day in the studio. That's what it takes, 7 days a week. That's how you become a successful touring musician. What would you say to those people, and why do you spend 3 to 4 hours a day on music?
Right. I think the first thing is I think everyone would benefit from developing a more scientific attitude to life and looking for, like, if Kanye West, because he said this, is I went away and made beats, locked myself in a room and made beats every day for 3 months. And then he somehow says, well, that's why I'm successful. Like, it's like, you got to look, a scientist, you might look at that and go, well, Kanye West says you need to practice for 12 hours a day. Or some producer said I need to get in the studio for 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. You might think that's cool, but like a scientist would kind of look at that and go, yeah, but like, is that true? Is that predictive of success? Does that mean everyone who works 12 hours a day is going to be, a successful producer or successful whatever they're trying to be? Because if they're not, then working 12 hours a day has no predictive value. There's some other thing at work. And maybe in that case, maybe it would be that 4 hours a day is effective, for example. So I think and I'll tell you why I only do the 4 hours in a second, but the big thing I think people should really try to get is having a more scientific view, a more scientific perspective on like why to do certain things. Don't do stuff because I said to do it or because anyone said to do it. Think about, what does the data say? Is this reasonable? Does this make sense to me? Don't just believe something because some random, just because you heard it on the internet kind of thing, you know? And then there's the other side of this, where there's like this gospel of hustle from guys like Gary Vee that you know, if you're not working 16 hours a day or 18 hours a day, you're a loser. You know, you're never going to be successful. I think the reality is like it's cool and it's exciting to talk about, but again, it doesn't answer the question of like what actually works, what's effective. And so this is where it comes back to Anders Ericsson, this scientist I mentioned who wrote the book Peak. He mentioned that when they were studying violinists, so they studied average, above average, and elite performers, I think it was. And the average players practiced the most, right? And then the elite performers, I don't know if they practice the least, but they tended to practice 3.5 to 4 hours a day in 2 blocks. So they practice for 1.5 to 2 hours, take a break, usually take a nap, and then they'd have another 1.5 to 2 hours as well. So that was where I came up with this idea of I'll do 3 to 4 hours. It's usually averaging around, the goal is usually 4 hours a day now. So I think it's just gotten easier over time. But yeah, it was a fascinating study, right? So these elite performers were doing 3.5 to 4 hours a day. They got on average 5 hours more sleep per week compared with the average performers. They had the same amount of leisure time, but they were much more clear on how much time they actually spent on leisure, which was basically showed that they were better at measuring their time, whereas the average performers obviously didn't really organize their time, didn't seem to make much of an effort to organize their time. So, and this is all scientific research. This is not like Kanye West's opinion or some producer that you like on the internet's opinion on what it takes to be successful. This is the best data that we have on what it takes to become good at something, including music, is that, yeah, elite performers work 3.5 to 4 hours a day, because after that, if you're practicing the right way, your brain won't be able to practice past that. You know, I think you said it well when I was asking about this, like chatting about this idea of, well, why not go for 5 or 6 hours? And the idea is that, or 12. Now, if you could practice for like more than 4 hours a day, you're not practicing hard enough.
What, if any, what were some false assumptions you had when you were first getting into music production?
I haven't thought about that much before. False assumptions.
Or maybe a particular mindset that, you know, like, oh, this thing is easy or whatever.
I mean, I think part of me probably thought it would be easier to get something sounding good. You know, to get something to the point where it sounds professional. And I mean, I still have that sometimes. I'm listening to a song on Spotify. I'm like, man, this song sucks. I could do so much better than this. But then another thought comes in and goes, yeah, do you really think that? Like, did you really? Are you sure? So I don't know if you ever really get rid of that mindset, which is part of the brain, maybe. I don't know. False assumptions. Yeah, maybe think that it was easy, or that like I think at first, because I haven't had this attitude towards practice the whole time. It's really it's gradually developed and gotten deeper and deeper, stronger and stronger. At first, I think I was just a lot more disorganized. Like, I've always been fairly disciplined because I've had to build my own business, and you know I've had to be organized, learn to be organized for that. I'm used to having a calendar and a schedule and being organized, so that probably helps. But even then, like when I started, I was like, oh, I'll do a lot of tutorials and I'll do it, a few hours a day, and that'll get me there. And whereas now it's like, now I'm much more like, all right, well, what's the actual, like, I'll sit down for an hour or 2 hours and sit there and like just think. We'll go for a walk to a park and just think. And I think this applies to everything in my life now. The way that I feel so crystal clear on what I want to do, what's important to me, what sacrifices I'm willing to make and not willing to make, and in regards to music and in regards to everything else. And it all comes, for some reason this year there's been this big transition where, yeah, I'll go for a walk and just think for 2 hours on what's important, what I could be doing better. If, with the music, I'm thinking about, well, do I really want to, what would it take, for example, to actually headline at Ultra Music Festival? So like breaking that down into concrete steps and then saying, well, if it was actually going to be achieved, here's what I need to do, here's what I need to start by, here's how these, various factors would change. Instead of just going, I just want to get better, I'll just do a tutorial every day. It's being much more like, where am I trying to get to? And what are the specific things that hold me back? I think that's been the biggest shift since I started.
Let's say someone comes to you, they've never made music in their life. They come to you with a lot of money, an amount that you can't turn down. You're just like, yeah, of course. And they say, or they ask you to coach them for 30 days. Their goal is to become a well-rounded producer. So no specific goal at the moment. You design a learning plan for them. What does that plan look like? 30 days.
30 days. Interesting. I think if they only had 30 days, or like I was trying to get them to a specific result at the end of 30 days, like the best result possible, it would have to be somewhat general, because I want them at the end of the 30 days, they're excited, they're pumped up, they're like, man, look at what I accomplished in 30 days. So I think the first thing worth teaching would be how to make a basic melody. And that would, might involve like a coaching call with me, or or maybe I'd record a video or point them to a tutorial. But the idea is teach them to write like a fairly simple melody. And then over the next 30 days together, I would coach them through the process of turning that melody into a song, with the idea of by the end of that 30 days, they've basically a start to finish tutorial. But I guess if it was an insane amount of cash, I'd probably be on the phone with them, maybe even fly to them and hang out with them in their house or apartment and sort of work with them like that. And yeah, I think I need to know that they're committed to the point where they're able to work at least 4 hours a day on it. They're going to be able to track their time. They're not going to have Facebook, or so they're not going to do anything basically other than music when they're working on music. That's what I do. My phone's on flight mode, I think, back on the table behind me, and Facebook's logged out on my computer. I don't check email when I'm in my 60-minute times, because that's another thing. I set a timer for 60 minutes, start at 7 a.m. every morning. Timer goes on for 60 minutes. When it goes off, 10-minute break, and I repeat that at least 4 times. And so I'd need them to basically commit to doing that 5 days a week for 4 weeks. And so that would be the productivity system. And then as far as what we do, I'd just be like hands-on, one-on-one coaching as far as leading them by the hand how to take that melody. And, first we'd probably take the melody, get it sounding good just on our piano first. So just not worrying about anything, just starting with that basic composition, getting the piano working. And then I think before we'd start arranging it or sound designing or anything like that, we'd grab their favorite song that they like. We'd map out the arrangement with markers in Logic, whatever DAW they're using. And then we'd take their little melody on the piano and use that and arrange it into a song. Maybe add some chords if there's chords called for. Drop in a drum kit, default drum kit, anyone they like the sound of. So we design basically the basic drums, bass, chords, and melody before we do any sound design at all. And it's already arranged into a whole song. And I think we could do that in the first few days, maybe the first week. And the rest of the month, we basically start tweaking all the sounds, mixing it and making it sound good, and then maybe doing some basic mastering.
I love it. All right, 2 more questions. Do you see any, you've been doing this for a year now, do you see any challenges coming up on the horizon? And if so, how do you plan on dealing with them? Whether that's creating a system or how you're thinking about it. I mean, does that come to mind?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is going to be the whole challenge of developing the sounds, like the unique sound. Because everyone, what I think, it's really interesting, man. Like everyone wants to think music is this subjective art form. And it's totally art, I get that. But if music theory is fascinating because you realize that all music's like, it's math. And if you could program, if I don't know how much people know about AI and artificial intelligence, but if you could get every song into a MIDI file, if you had the time to do that, you could then give that to a computer that's powerful enough. It could analyze that song, all those songs, and figure out the patterns, and then spit out songs probably better than any of us. And that's coming. If it doesn't exist, eventually that software will work on like MP3s and things like that. So if a computer can do that, it means I don't think there's people only think it's subjective. And this is the thing when it comes to creating your own sound, they think it's this subjective thing that you've just got to find. When I think that really that just means it just means you don't really understand how it works yet. And so I think the challenge that I'm seeing is because I just did my first, I guess call it like an official promotion. So shout out to Booty and the music marketing course, because I used that and got onto YouTube and some cool stuff there. But the feedback that I got back from people regarding the song was it's a good song. It's a bit too EDM-y maybe. But the biggest piece of, I guess, objective feedback that seemed to come back in the sense that because there's a lot of conflicting feedback, which to me is the sort of the different people like different things. But the most objective thing was that it was a little bit too generic. It wasn't really bringing anything new to the table, which to me comes back to this: what's the sound? Like, why are people showing up? And so that's made me start thinking, well, that's really the challenge now. I think is it's pretty straightforward to get better. Like the way I look at how to practice now, it's pretty straightforward to get better at songwriting and mixing and sound design. Like that's all pretty. Just as long as I know if I put in the time, that'll be fine. The trick now is like, what do I do for the sound? I've got some cool ideas that I'm not even sure how I'm going to implement them yet. Like I guess in the interest of just being completely honest, I grew up playing guitar. I love rock and roll. Like I used to want to be a rock star. I got a picture of me somewhere with like long teased out hair, like Motley Crue, black and girls' jeans and ripped stockings over the top. It's pretty insane. And so that was me when I was like 18 or 19. And so I would love, because I don't hear it. Like a lot of dance music, especially when I listen to a lot of it, it starts to sound all the same. Like it's always a female vocal. It's always, like it's always a verse, then a build, then a drop, and then a drop on the fourth bar of the drop has this like little fill kind of a thing that happens. Like it's just it is very formulaic. And so like I'm thinking, like, what can I do? Like what would I like to do? And what I would like to do is find a way to bring in some of the sleeves and just the groove that you get in blues, like just rock and roll basically, and find a way to bring that into music, like stuff from metal, stuff from Guns N' Roses, AC/DC, like those kind of bands. Find a way, which I don't know how I'm going to do that yet, because I think it's guitar is a very different instrument to a synth. But in terms of like, I think it's the sound spectrum that it occupies, so it's going to be mixed differently and all that. But yeah, that's me. Like I love the the dissonant blues notes. So that's what I've been thinking about lately. Is like how do I, as a challenge, how do I plan on it? How can I sort of integrate some of that stuff, my style, into the dance music, so I can actually bring something new to the table, so I can have something that John is actually offering something new.
Well, it's been fantastic talking to you, as always. Do you have any last words of advice for not just new producers, but any producer watching this or listening to this?
I think the most important thing that I mentioned a bit earlier was you've got to be clear on what you want. Like that is the thing. And the bulk of the time that you spend at this stuff is going to be the execution, so the doing the practice, and that applies to anything. But if you don't figure out what you want first, you're going to like go in a lot of different directions. And for me, it was that life coach and sitting down and doing that meditation thing and getting sort of clear on what I really wanted to do. And there's a million different ways I think that work for different things work for different people. So I'm not going to suggest that there's any right way to do it. But yeah, figure out what you want. Do you want to be like BT? Do you want to be a mainstream producer? Do you want to compete with Skrillex? Like, do you just want to do it for fun and maybe have like a small fan base? You just love the fact that you're just creating this weird, wacky stuff online. Like whatever it is that you want to do, like you've got to get clear on that, because that's otherwise all this other stuff. You're like, well, do you practice sound design, and study Noisia, or do you study Calvin Harris, for example? Like it's like you can't answer any of those questions until you figure out what you want. So I think that's despite all the how-to stuff that we've talked about, I think the most important thing, the thing that's going to give you the biggest return, is taking time to think about what you want.